With the United Nations calling for a global ceasefire due to the coronavirus pandemic, Saudi Arabia found a favorable opportunity to reduce the burden of its unnecessary war on Yemen. Saudi Arabia waited for the UN's calling to be translated into an agreement between its Yemeni proxies and the government of Sana'a to perpetuate its false narrative that its war on Yemen was a civil war. Saudis waited and waited while Sana'a adhered to its terms until Riyadh was finally forced to take the decision to unilaterally cease fire and halt military operations. Sana'a quickly rejected this as the Saudi ceasefire does not include a comprehensive non-temporary agreement. In the wake of the Aramco attacks, a Yemeni-Saudi truce was born by force, which was limited to avoiding mutual military operations represented by Saudi air raids versus Yemeni ballistic missiles and drones. However, major breaches by Riyadh led to the collapse of the truce. Yet, the Saudis desperately needed to halt the push of Ansarullah Sana'a forces towards Ma'rib, the oil capital of Yemen, which was happening at a fast pace, while the lines of Saudi Arabia's local tribal allies were cracking and its regional Emirati ally was retreating. Mohammed bin Salman wanted a fast way out with this mock ceasefire. Accordingly, Sana'a refused and resorted to presenting a corresponding initiative to the United Nations entitled A Comprehensive Solution Proposal to End the War on the Republic of Yemen in the form of a document to be signed by the real warring parties in this unending battle, the coalition countries and Yemen. The proposal includes a comprehensive ceasefire which comprises first a cessation of all hostilities and second the lifting of the land and sea blockade, an end to the air embargo and fixing the economic and humanitarian situation, in addition to a third paragraph related to the internal Yemeni political process. All these indications sent a clear message. Sana'a rejects any provisional ceasefire. Welcome to the Mideastream. I'm Marwa Osman. A two-week ceasefire declared by the Saudi-UAE coalition aggression against Yemen came into effect last Thursday. However, Yemen's armed forces and its Ansarullah resistance movement declared they will not abide unless the 5 years long siege on Yemen is lifted. To discuss this issue with us from Sydney is Jay Tharapel, who is member of the Yemen Solidarity Council. Thank you for being with us, Jay, to talk about this. Now, it's 5 years on with a brutal, unnecessary war and a blockade, naval, aerial, and land blockade against Yemen, it's the poorest nation in the Arab world. I don't know if our viewers know or not, but a $1 million question resides here. Why did Mohammed bin Salman and Mohammed bin Zayed decide on a ceasefire right now?
The publicly stated reason, according to the Saudis and Emiratis, is coronavirus, but the Yemeni government in Sana'a is not taking this seriously, and there's a very good reason for that. The last ceasefire was in December 2018, but all throughout 2019 last year, the Saudi aggression continued, and that's because the Saudis have made no effort to lift the blockade. To paraphrase Muhammad al-Bukhaiti, who represents the Ansarullah movement, any ceasefire that does not lift the siege on Yemen is a continuation of war. According to the government in Sana'a, the real reason why the Saudis announced this ceasefire is because, according to because, and this is to quote Mohammed Abdul Salam, the main reason is that the Saudis are trying to undercut the ongoing negotiations with the United Nations. And that's because the Saudis don't want a political solution. They would much rather because if a political solution is reached, it would shut them out of Yemen completely. Ultimately, the Saudis need to pretend like they're taking COVID-19 seriously, whereas the Yemeni government in Sana'a actually is taking it seriously. If you look at the proposals they've been making to the United Nations, they are entirely compatible with what the World Health Organization is advocating that all countries do. So, yeah, in the case of,
But look, to talk about their side of the story here, let's say that what their mainstream media is saying, I'm talking about Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates here, their mainstream media is claiming that this ceasefire, as you just mentioned, is intended to help prevent the coronavirus pandemic in Yemen. But how can that even be possible when you have a blockade that is not allowing any medical or food aid to enter the country? Even a couple of days back, there was a report saying that the U.S. confiscated 17 ships that were taking food and fuel to Yemen. That is just 2 days after the ceasefire was announced. What's all this about?
You're right. 2 days after the so-called ceasefire, we heard that the US and Saudi Arabia, they confiscated 17 ships that were packed with food and fuel that were sent for Yemen. They'd all been inspected by the United Nations. They got their permits after being checked for weapons. So needless to say, if they really cared about tackling coronavirus, they would have not only allowed those ships to dock at Hodeidah port, but they would have cooperated with aid organizations as well. If anything, the Saudis appear like they're trying to spread coronavirus in Yemen based on their actions, which are extremely suspicious. So firstly, they started airdropping boxes containing face masks, which then alarmed the Yemeni health ministry, because why would the Saudis care about Yemeni lives given the actions that they've committed? Mm-hmm. And secondly, the Saudis have been carrying out mass arrests in all of their cities and rounding up migrant workers, then amassing them in giant camps along the Yemeni border. Why would they do that at a time of coronavirus? And more importantly, why is the United Nations not condemning them for this? There's speculation that these people,
Jay, they are doing what to migrants in Saudi Arabia?
So they are rounding up the migrants from within their borders, within Saudi Arabia, from all of their cities, and then amassing them next to the Yemeni border.
And that
they're
is
putting
why?
them close to into the Yemeni border. Well, we don't know. We have to assume the worst because that's what the Saudis have done to Yemen. Mm-hmm. It could be, but it's certainly a health risk, regardless of whether you know the intentions. It's a major health risk, and the speculation is that these people have been deported from areas of Saudi Arabia where coronavirus is spreading, and that the Saudis are therefore trying to drive the disease into northern Yemen, which is where the Ansarullah movement is based. Mm-hmm. So, speaking of which, the United Nations is really not helping, to put it mildly. Just 3 days ago, they announced that they were cutting food aid to northern Yemen by half, even after acknowledging that it's the worst humanitarian crisis on earth, as they've done for the past few years. They say it's because they don't have the money, but it could just be that they're bowing to pressure from the US-Saudi occupation. The US justification for cutting aid to Yemen as well, on top of that, is that the food is reaching areas under Houthi control. But those areas are where 80% of Yemen's population are, and that's where all the starvation is as well. So quite simply, food aid is being used as a weapon to force Yemen to surrender.
Well, let's look back now on the Yemeni side here, where just 1 day before the announcement of the unilateral ceasefire, this is very important to always say, it's a unilateral ceasefire. Mohammed Abdul Salam, who is the spokesperson of the Ansarullah resistance movement, said that Ansarullah had sent a document to the UN. It's a comprehensive plan to end the war that led the foundations for a political dialogue and also a transitional period in Sana'a. Who do you think the second party, Abdul Salam, was referring to that should be signing this document, this proposed dialogue document that he sent to the UN, or his party sent to the UN? And what about this transitional period? Transition from what to where exactly?
Well, the first signatory would be the Republic of Yemen in Sana'a, which produced the comprehensive plan that you referred to. And the second party to answer your question is the leadership of the Saudi-led coalition. Mm-hmm. As for the transitional period, according to the comprehensive plan put forward by the Yemeni government in Sana'a, that transition can only begin once the provisions of the document are implemented. And that mainly involves lifting naval blockade, opening up the roads that separate the cities that are controlled by the two sides, and also lifting the air embargo. Once these are implemented, then the transitional period can begin, but only among Yemeni political factions that are indigenous to Yemen, not foreigners. Mm-hmm. That's obviously something the Saudi-led coalition does not want to acknowledge, because it would mean admitting that they have no place in Yemen. So first, the foreigners have to leave Yemen. This is like in the long term. Then there can be a dialogue among the various Yemeni stakeholders. And if the constitution needs to be changed, then it can be changed within the context of a national referendum. How is that not reasonable?
Well, it is not reasonable for a country, I'm giving my opinion here, that does not even have a constitution. I'm talking about Saudi Arabia, excuse me.
Exactly.
I had to say that.
Yeah.
But, well, Ansarullah were really quick to refuse a unilateral ceasefire that offers absolutely nothing on the ground in Yemen. Other than that, it was just like a maneuver to hit a brake on the advancement of Ansarullah in the Ma'rib area, which is basically the house of oil for Yemen. It's where all the real good oil, Yemeni oil is. Now, accordingly, what they did in Sana'a is present the United Nations comprehensive initiative, the initiative that you were telling us about. But there was a very important part of this initiative is the signatory parts. We spoke briefly about it in the question that preceded this one, but it's very important for the people to know that Yemenis know that there's a war against them initiated by Saudi Arabia through a coalition. But Saudi Arabia wants Yemenis to sign this initiative as if it's a civil war. How do I assess this? How do you assess the refusal of Sana'a for all of this?
Well, on the one hand, the framing of that document is unacceptable to Saudi Arabia because it recognizes the government in Sana'a as the legitimate government of Yemen. So if the Saudis sign that document, it will mean acknowledging that they're foreigners, which is tantamount to acknowledging defeat. Moreover, if the UN brokers the deal, then they too will have to accept that the legitimate government of Yemen is the one in Sana'a, not the fake government of Yemen that the Saudis claim to represent, headed by a fugitive ex-president. On the other hand, quitting Yemen is probably the best thing for Saudi Arabia right now. The Saudis spend $200 million every day, and that's a total of $365 billion over the past 5 years. And despite spending all that money, they're losing. They've lost territory in Ma'rib, as you mentioned. And the Yemeni national resistance has taken their struggle into the Saudi-occupied territories of northern Yemen, territories like Najran, for example. Mm-hmm. Also, oil prices have collapsed from $60 to $20 a barrel over the past 4 months. And given that the Saudis rely on that one commodity to pay for everything, for everything that they buy, there will be pressure internally for them to cut their losses and finally quit Yemen.
Well, I want to thank you very much, Jay Therapal, who is member of the Yemen Solidarity Council, for joining us from Sydney to talk about this mock ceasefire started by Saudi Arabia. Please stay tuned for our next segment. Iraqi President Barham Saleh has nominated Head of Intelligence Mustafa al-Kadhimi as Iraq's new Prime Minister designate, the politically fragmented nation's third choice this year. The nomination last Thursday came moments after predecessor Adnan al-Zurfi ended his bid to form a government. The upheaval threatened a leadership vacuum amid a severe economic crisis and the coronavirus pandemic. A new Prime Minister in Iraq in this following report. Iraqi President Barham Saleh named last week Intelligence Chief Mustafa al-Kadhimi to form a new government. The move came after former Iraqi Prime Minister Adnan al-Zurfi issued a statement on Thursday and officially resigned from the mission of forming the Iraqi cabinet entrusted to him. Al-Kadhimi, who has been serving as director of the Iraqi National Intelligence Service since 2016, has been mandated to form the government within 30 days, as per the constitution, as he received support from different political blocs in Iraq. Zurfi cited internal and external reasons for his decision to withdraw, claiming that his decision not to proceed with his nomination was to preserve Iraq and its greatest interests. Al-Kadhimi becomes the third leader to be nominated as the Prime Minister designate in just 10 weeks. Al-Kadhimi took to his Twitter account after his nomination, saying, I will work tirelessly to present Iraqis with a program and a cabinet that will work to serve them, protect their rights, and take Iraq towards a prosperous future. Al-Qadhimi was an opposition journalist in exile during the tenure of Saddam Hussein. Following the US-led invasion of 2003, he returned to Iraq to help launch the Iraqi media network and work as a human rights advocate. In 2016, he was handpicked by then Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi to be Iraq's intelligence chief at the height of the war against ISIS. Al-Qadhimi is considered a pragmatist with close ties to the US, Saudi Arabia, and Tehran. He is seen as someone who might be equipped to manage the current challenging relationship with the US. Currently, Iraqi Prime Minister Adel Abdul Mahdi is still at the helm on a caretaker role, despite having resigned in November under pressure from the US. Iraq has struggled politically in the recent months and faces economic ruin following decades of US invasions and wars, sanctions, political corruption, and social unrest. Now, the country is also grappling with the coronavirus pandemic. The recent plummeting of the price of oil has upended Iraq's budget, which is based on oil prices nearly twice their current value. But until the country has a functioning sitting government, it will not be able to tackle the budget issue. Now to talk about the latest in Iraq, with us from London is Shabir Hassan Ali, who's a political commentator. Thank you for being with us, Mr. Shabir. Now, Adnan al-Zurfi, he bid farewell to his duties to clear the way for Mustafa al-Kazemi, who is now rising with unanimous support from different political blocs in Iraq to become a prime minister. However, Zurfi was supported by the US. He sent hidden messages when he was resigning his post saying that the most prominent challenge will be in the coming stage. Can this be understood as somewhat of a heads up for any upcoming political deadlocks that the US might create for al-Kazemi, since their best candidate was al-Zurfi?
I think the problem you've got in Iraq is not really a sovereign nation at this time. It is fully under occupation, much like Palestine. And because of the workings of America, unfortunately, because of a large number of corrupt individuals within the echelons of Iraqi power, this is a big problem. Having said that, there is nothing worse than the chaos that Iraq is living through at this time. So it is absolutely imperative for the Iraqi people, the Iraqi government, to develop a cohesive government, even if it's not the best government that, for example, I would say is wonderful, but it needs to have a working government. It's the only way that it can actually move forward in one way or another, and it is the only way that it can put a stop to America's games and America's interfering. The downside and the problem, like you said rightly, in Mr. Zorfi's parting words, if you like, is that someone like Zorfi, someone who is essentially a stooge of America, he will work with some of the more naive people within Iraqi politics to manipulate, to play, to create problems for any universally accepted candidate, like, for example, Mr. Kazemi. So it's a difficult situation in Iraq. It's always been difficult in Iraq because of the large amount of corruption from the time of Saddam Hussein, from the fact that you have many people who are not true Iraqis but have run away to the West and then come back under the guise of wanting to take on power. And of course, you've got a lot of people who learned about politics during the reign of Bremer. So there's a nasty soup over there. But at the same time, following Daesh, you had a big change. And there are good people within the government. And of course, there's Hashd al-Sha'bi, the popular mobilization units and their political factions. So it is possible. It's just the people of Iraq, the government of Iraq needs to be very careful of America's games, because America is like a wounded rabid dog. And it's just flailing around like a lunatic, and they need to be very careful.
Well, Mr. Shabir, Mustafa al-Kazemi is supposed to serve in office for 1 year in order for elections to take place. But there is now talk within the Iraqi media that al-Kazemi's government may complete the entire electoral cycle until 2022 in the event that the coronavirus pandemic continues on and the financial crisis also continues, especially after the collapse of oil prices that has affected everyone. Claiming that they are claiming in the media in Iraq that any early election will need efforts. It will need financing budgets that's no less than $1 billion to cover all of Iraq's 18 provinces. Do you think this might actually be some sort of a catalyst for renewed Iraqi unrest and protests, maybe, rather than it would actually be a scenario for a new phase?
That's actually a very difficult question, because I understand where the people who are saying that he'll probably end up serving his entire term until 2022 are coming from. Because when you have a government that is so precarious and finally, after a lot of effort, you have someone who is accepted by all different sides, this person comes into power. If you're only going to keep that person there for a year so that he is someone who, if you like, organizes the next election, what is to say that following the next election, the people decide whatever, at that point even, the next person is unable to, because of the infighting within Iraqi politics.
So we go back to square one.
Exactly. So there is an argument to say that, okay, if we get someone who is accepted by everyone, okay, let this person run his 2-year term. Also, like you say rightly, in the case that there is this COVID-19 outbreak, also the chaos with the fact that Iraq's money is sitting in banks in New York when it shouldn't be there, it should be back in Iraq. There needs to be a move to Iraqify, if you like, Iraq and de-Americanize the government. And this is something that is going to take a very long time. Democracy is nice, democracy is good, elections are lovely and everything, but sometimes, I don't know, I feel that elections can just create more problems than they're worth, because when you've got America sitting inside a country, when America controls the media and everything, America will manipulate the election.
Well, look at it this way, Shabir. Maybe America itself is going to postpone its own elections this year because of this pandemic. So why not in Iraq as well? But look, the biggest challenge for Kazemi's performance that will be most definitely judged by everyone is his ability to accomplish what the parliament-approved bill, the Iraqi parliament-approved bill, to withdraw all foreign troops from Iraq. Now, I know it is a bit early to tell, but given his former position as chief of Iraq's intelligence, do you think he might be able to negotiate some sort of a new agreement with the United States to start an actual withdrawal from Iraq?
I really hope so, but I have a lot of skepticism when it comes to making any agreement with America, because America lies, I mean, Pompeo is on the record, saying that we lie. We say one thing with one side of the mouth, but we actually do something completely different. Don't make a deal or any agreement with someone like that. America has been told in no uncertain terms by the government during the time of the current caretaker, Adil Abdel Mahdi, as well as by the millions of people who came out against America in Iraq, that America needs to go following the killing of Qasem Soleimani and Hajj Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis. Enough is enough. America, now you need to go. As Said Hassan put it, they can go vertically. They came vertically, but if they don't leave properly, then, they're going to have to go horizontally. If they want to go alive to their families, to look after them during coronavirus, Allah, go. There's no need for you to stay over here.
Well, I have just one more minute, and I would love to talk a bit more, just in 1 minute, about the Shia groups, the Shia political factions or blocs in Iraq that showed that even for in 10 weeks, there were a third choice for prime minister, and that is Mustafa al-Kazemi, and they all actually agreed, which shows a bit of a unity that was not there before the killing of Qasem Soleimani, Hajj Qasem Soleimani, Lieutenant General, and Hajj Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis. What is it that actually maybe hinders the effort of previous designated PMs when the Shia groups were not united together versus this time when they all agreed and no bickering happened whatsoever?
I think one of the most important things, and I think one of the reasons why all of the different groups have actually come together and said, okay, fine, we have to agree on this person, is because, as I said earlier, chaos is a disaster for a country, at any time. Mm-hmm. And all of the various groups are led by intelligent people, and they know that if there is chaos, America is going to infiltrate more, it's going to create more problems. Mm-hmm. When you have someone like Zurfi, who is he's an American stooge. This man is not Iraqi, he's American. Mm-hmm. You can't take someone like Zurfi seriously as any sort of government figure in Iraq, and all of the factions made that very clear. Mm-hmm. With Mustafa al-Kadhimi, yes, there are some people who have reservations. There's reservations about every politician. This is normal. Mm-hmm. But he is the best from a pretty poor batch, shall we say? Mm-hmm. And everyone, like you say, has agreed. So this is what is needed. There needs to be a government now, because the longer this stretches out without a government, without a functioning system, mm-hmm. the more America is going to cause more and more problems, and America is going to be able to prepare itself. Because ultimately, like for the previous point we said, the Americans are leaving the region. This is not up for debate. It's not something that maybe will happen or maybe will. It's happening. It's going to happen. Most
definitely right now, after the COVID-19 pandemic, this has changed a lot as well. I want to thank you very much, Shabir Hassanani, political commentator, for talking with us from London about the latest in Iraq. Thank you for being with us, and please stay tuned next week for more from the Mideastream.